one of the most fascinating discussions I had was with the chief medical doctor at Star City, which is the equivalent to, NASA's, where they train the our astronauts. And I asked the doctor, I said, what is the big difference between the U.S. space program and the Soviet space program? And he said, well, in the U.S. you send your fittest people to space. In Russia, we send our brightest people to space. And he said the difference is actually Dr. Breckman's adaptogens have enabled us to qualify people that would otherwise not be able to endure, space sickness and the gravitational issues and the stresses associated with space travel. And as a result, we're able to send our brightest people. And so that was real testimony to the fact that how they were, using these products to really give them an edge. Because in Russia, that's what they were, they were at war with the West. And anything they could do that could demonstrate their superiority, whether it be sports or the space race, that's where they put their money and their energy into. So the tests that went on, it was also interesting because in the far east of Russia, he said when I would request for Moscow to send me lab animals, they would say, well, we can't send you lab animals, but you can use all the soldiers you want. Which meant that all of the studies that were done on humans. And I'm talking about large-scale studies where they would take a auto plant in a province, and all the auto workers would be, in a sense, forced to include this supplement with the intention to see, could it improve their productivity? Could it reduce the amount of illness? And, so to have a study that was like 75,000 people over a 3 or 4 year period is just unheard of. And yet, that's the type of science that's really behind the ingredients that are used in our Ionix and our e-shots and so forth. So, great stuff.
Add liver water, please. Yes, thanks. Have America taken that on now?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's even in the sports world. When we first, in fact, that was our original motivation to learn what the Soviets were doing to both condition their athletes and train them and so forth. And what we learned is that there wasn't a lot of difference in the actual physical training, but there was a big difference in restoration. So I think they were really ahead of us in terms of the techniques where, athletes would ice their bodies and they would use as much, were as rigorous about the restorative aspects of training as they were about the training itself. Because I remember talking to one of the doctors and saying, well, adaptogens are great, but you're dealing with world-class athletes. And he said, what people don't realize is world-class athletes are in a constant state of breakdown because they're pushing the envelope, no matter what sport you're involved in. And so you need that edge. And that edge is how quickly can your body restore itself from the training that you're putting in order to improve your performance. And that's where, again, we learned that of the work. Now, obviously, in the Eastern Bloc countries, they didn't stop with natural substances. A lot of them were also using drugs, steroids and things of that nature. But as the world became more educated about it, what they recognized is, we still need to find a way to give our athletes an edge that isn't going to harm the athlete. And so some of the work that we had originally translated, it came out of the Institute of Sport in Moscow with top secret on it, because they treated those as proprietary secrets that were advancing their system. So when we had access to that, it was kind of a very interesting time, because it was like the Wild West, because you had people that had grown up in the system and they didn't understand capitalism, because everything they did was in reference to respond to the state. And so even when we started to develop relationships with the intention, and we still source many of our natural products from the Far East of Russia, because that's where they grow, that's where they're indigenous. But when we first started developing those relationships, it was interesting because they had no concept of commerce. They would say, as an example, if there was an herb, like say ginseng, that they would typically have produced and sold for, let's say, $1. And we said, okay, we will buy all the ginseng you're producing for $1. And their question is, well, what are you going to sell it for? Well, we're going to sell it for $10. Well, then we'll sell it to you for $5. So it's kind of like they didn't recognize that there were actually costs associated with marketing and everything else that went along with it, because they just didn't have a concept. So again, it was kind of, and they're still learning. Although what we saw is that the military basically just changed uniforms, as a lot of them became the Russian mafia.
Right.
We had a joint venture with a former admiral, and he invited me to go fishing one day and showed up with this 300-foot, Navy launch that he had commandeered for the weekend. It was a bit crazy. So he's an oligarch now. I mean, it just.
Good.
Well, yeah. They know how to drink over there, that's for sure. Better take responsibility for your own health, because you can't rely on the government or other people to take care of it for you.